Hello, and welcome to our continuing conversation about spirituality and growth in the life of contemplation, growth in the Spirit of God, learning how to deepen our relationships with ourself, with others, with God, and with all of creation. Before we continue today, there was a question that I received that I think is an important question. I perhaps just assumed that everyone was very clear about this, but sometimes assumptions are incorrect. But the question that I received is, why is it that you speak about the Spirit when you are speaking about contemplation? Why aren't you speaking about Jesus? Or why aren't you speaking about God the Father? Why the Spirit? When the answer to that question is because I'm speaking from the Christian tradition, the Christian Orthodox tradition of how we understand God. If you remember, we believe as Christians that there is one God, but we believe that God is manifested to us in three persons: Father, Son, and Spirit. And each of the manifestations of God come to us in a unique way. So when we are speaking primarily of the creation, we speak about God the Father as the creator, not exclusively as the creator, because obviously the role of the Spirit is also very important in creation, as is the role of the Son in the redemption of creation. But primarily, when we speak about creation, we speak about the Father. When we speak about redemption, we speak about Jesus, the saving passion, death, and resurrection of Jesus. But again, we can't speak of Jesus just in isolation, because Jesus' sacrifice was the sacrifice that was accepted by the Father, and Jesus' gift as a result of his sacrificial death was the Spirit of God to his people. So again, we concentrate talking about Jesus when we're talking about redemption, but at the same time, we have to pay attention to the role of the Father and also the role of the Spirit. When we're speaking about spirituality, the internal movement within the soul, the internal movement within who we are as human beings having spiritual relationships, we primarily speak about the Spirit because it is the creative Spirit of God that St. Paul reminds us, in which we live and move and have our being. So the Spirit is the force, the energy, the animation of who we are as human beings. So as a result, when we talk about spirituality, we reference the Spirit of God. But again, just as when we talk about creation or redemption, it's not in exclusion to the Father and to Jesus, but rather is primarily an emphasis, a way of understanding. You cannot be a spiritual person within the Christian tradition without having a relationship with Jesus. And as Jesus tells us, if you want to learn how to love his Father, that is essential to a relationship with him. So anyways, the reason I talk about Spirit is mainly because I prefer to speak about spirituality from the Orthodox Christian tradition, which means that it will be the language primarily of the Spirit, but not to the exclusion of God the Father or God the Son. So I hope that doesn't confuse the matter. I hope, in fact, it helps, but we'll see. For today, as we continue with our primary discussion, there'll be another question that I'm going to answer as part of our discussion and our conversation. But I remind everyone that we're talking about today contemplation, continuing to talk about our contemplative relationship with God, with self, with others, with all of creation. And the last 3 days, we've spent each day talking about a different component of our relationship, our unified, integrated experience of what it means to be a contemplative person. And today we're going to be talking about our relationship with all of creation, the unity that comes to us as a gift from God, the Father, the Son, and the Spirit. But I'd like you to just take a moment, for instance, and recall something that I know that you know, but I want to give it to you in an example that might help, again, clarify what we're talking about. It's an example that has nothing to do with spirituality. It's how you perceive and how you discover the truth. So let's imagine, for instance, that you are part of a cooperative, for instance, and the cooperative is all the homes and cottages that are built around a particular lake. Let's say it's a very big lake. It's a lake that's open to boating. It's a lake that's open to skiing. It's a lake that's open to fishing. It's a very popular lake. And as a member of the board, you determine with all the other board members that you want to determine for yourself and for future planning that you want to determine what the health of the lake is. So you need to hire somebody who's going to help you understand what the health of the lake is. So you want the best possible answer to your question. How healthy is the lake? Are there things that we need to do? Things that we need to pay attention to? You would not, I do not think you would hire a person to answer that question who would come back and report to you that the lake is very healthy because it has many cottages, has wonderful docks, people are fishing on the lake, the water skiers seem to enjoy it, the boaters seem to enjoy it, and it is something that continues to attract all sorts of people, and the property values of the lake are continuing to increase. Those are nice things to know, and those are nice things that help us understand something about the lake, but they don't answer the question, how healthy is the lake? If you want to know how healthy the lake is, you don't ask the people who are using it. And here's the distinction. You don't ask the people necessarily who are using it, because the only thing they can provide you with is anecdotal evidence or data. What you rather do is you pay attention to the people or the organisms that are dependent on the lake. Not those who are using it, but the people, the organisms that are dependent on it. So you hire a biologist or someone who can check the water quality in addition to the marine life quality. And you go and you dig into the muck that's on the bottom of the lake and you try to determine if the bottom of the lake is healthy. Is it sandy like it's supposed to be? Is the ecosystem of the lake producing the plant life that it needs? Are the fish in abundance? And then you dig into the muck, you dig into the soil, and you dig up all the organisms and life that lives on the bottom of the lake. You start pulling them out, and hopefully they'll be very healthy. But if you start pulling them out and they all have two heads and 12 legs, or they're supposed to be green and they're purple, it's an indication that something's not right. So you would go back and you would report to the board, well, the lake might look like it's great, and you might perceive that it's wonderful. But if you dig deeper into it and if you study it and you pay attention to what's going on, we have some serious problems. And so if you were the member of the board, you would be appreciative of that, because now you know what you're dealing with. And you might even have two conversations with people. All they care about is whether their property values are important, they're continuing to rise, and that they can use the lake for skiing and fishing. They don't care about anything else. But then you have other people who are vitally, vitally interested in digging deeper, paying attention to what is important and how the lake is healthy and integrated and part of a bigger whole. When we're talking about spirituality, what we've been doing these last weeks is we're not talking about the surface. We're talking about the deeper part. We're talking about not the users of spirituality. We're talking about the people who understand that they are dependent on God. that they are dependent on their relationship with God, that they want to make sure that it's healthy, that it's integrated, that it's whole. And as a result, when we talk to people who have a completely different need and a completely different perspective, it doesn't mean that the people who are looking at it in a different way don't have those same needs and perspectives. They do. Because either spirituality is what we said it is, something that we are as human beings, essential to who we are, so everybody are spiritual beings. But not everybody pays attention to everything or remains focused on everything in the same way. This is important because in the weeks that we've been studying this together and having a conversation with each other, you've probably noticed, and I know you have because of the comments that I've received, you've probably noticed that we're going deeper and deeper. Yes, we are going deeper and deeper, but we're not going deeper and deeper in a way that is irresponsible. We're going deeper and deeper because you have, as you continue in this conversation, been prepared to ask the bigger questions. Hopefully, you've been putting into practice some of the disciplines that we've been talking about, that you've been paying attention, that you've been trying to become more mindful, that you've been trying to ask yourselves the questions that are important, that you've encountered some silence and you've encountered some solitude, that you've tried to become less judgmental and more compassionate, that you've tried to do all those things that we've been talking about, because as you do that, the mystery of God opens, the fullness of God's grace opens, and you're able to understand and appreciate, as a result of your experience, your authentic religious experience, the deeper questions, the questions that require that you dig down deep, that you're not afraid to do it, that you feel not a sense of confidence, but you feel that you are responding to the invitation of the Spirit of God to deepen your understanding, to deepen your awareness, to deepen your relationship. It would be irresponsible on my part to bring up for conversation some of the things that I've brought up for conversation on any particular Sunday morning when we gather again in church, for people who have not thought about spirituality, have not used the language of spirituality, have not been given the time to actually wrestle with their spirituality and to ask the questions. It would be irresponsible to stand up on a Sunday morning and just simply begin to talk. It would cause panic. It would cause anxiety. People would be unprepared for the conversation. But because we've been spending time in this conversation and we've been going slowly in this conversation, as a result of that, we are able to look at the deeper questions. I don't really like the fact that we call them deeper questions. I think they're more essential. They're more present to us. We become more aware of the manifestations of them. But I don't necessarily think they're deeper, but I guess that's one way of understanding it. This is important because yesterday when I was trying to speak about a relationship with God and the need to learn what your identity is, how you understand yourself in relationship to God, how you live according to God's life and will, how you learn to respond to God, I used as an example the person of Jesus. And I understand for many of you who are listening, perhaps it was the first time you ever thought about Jesus in that way. Most of the time, we don't think about Jesus in that way. We don't imagine Jesus struggling. We don't imagine Jesus trying to discover something. We don't imagine Jesus weighing decisions, right and wrong. We kind of imagine Jesus as the whole package, with the whole story told. And that's because we're looking backward. We already know how the story unfolds. We already know how to dot the I's and cross the T's. We have the experience of the church for 2,000 years We have the experience of people who have gone before us, who've talked to us about their relationship with Jesus. We have the ongoing revelation that we've been gifted with. We have the experience of the people of God. We have all those things, but that's looking backward. What we did yesterday was we didn't look backward. We tried to put ourselves into the present moment. We tried to put ourselves into the actual relationship, the real content of how Jesus' life may have unfolded. Of course, we did so with only a sense of speculation because none of us know for sure. It wasn't recorded. But there is archaeological evidence. There is evidence from the Christian community and from Christian writings and from the memories of the people who knew Jesus best, who would indicate to us that some of the things that perhaps we thought about and we encountered yesterday, perhaps even for the first time, are important. It's also important from an Orthodox Christian dogmatic perspective to permit Jesus to be a human person. Do not permit the divinity of Jesus to overwhelm his humanity. Because if you do that, then what you end up with a Jesus that is not unlike a god from the Greek pantheon, who really isn't human, but just comes down to earth and begins to play with human beings, is like a play actor, knows everything that's going to be happening and just performs. That is not the meaning of the incarnation. Jesus is not understood as a member of the Greek gods in the pantheon of gods who came to toy with humanity. The incarnation says that Jesus became a human being, like us in all things but sin. So when he experienced pain, it was real pain. It wasn't fake pain. When he experienced joy, he experienced real joy. When he is shown struggling, he truly struggled. When he had a question, he truly questioned. All of that is who he is. And to pretend otherwise, to read the story from where we are back into the experience of Jesus, makes the incarnation less than what it really is. Again, as people who have entered into a contemplative journey, have entered into asking ourselves some of the questions, who have been willing to sit in silence and solitude, who have been willing to think about who we are in relationship with God, that prepares us to begin to understand a little bit better about the person of Jesus. It helps us to enter into a completely different experience, a more, if you would, richer experience, a more complete experience of who Jesus is for us and who Jesus is for the church and the world in which we live. So that's why I chose to talk about Jesus and his relationship with God yesterday in that way, because he can show us, not because he's pretending. He can show us because he actually did live a human life. Now, that human life was informed by his divinity, and that's always been a question in the church. How much did the divinity of Jesus inform his humanity? How much of the humanity of Jesus informed his divinity? We don't have an answer to that. We just know that in the incarnation, the experience of both God and man, human and divine, was held in a perfect tension, a perfect experience, an authentic experience of both Jesus being divine and Jesus being human, and that was the experience of Jesus. We don't know the details of it, and it's be foolhardy to try to figure it out. And the church did try to figure it out at one time, but finally gave up. It's something that can't be figured out. It's just something that needs to be accepted. All of that brings us to our last point. Relationship with all of creation, the unifying, integrative experience of living as a spiritual person fully alive, fully awake, and fully open to the Spirit of God. And again, that experience changes how you see things. Again, reading from Thomas Merton's book, New Seeds of Contemplation. And I'm going to tell you right now that this particular quotation is the most difficult one yet. But there is a richness to it. And there is something to it that should invite you into a deeper experience of unity and should encourage you in a more free desire to journey towards God. Here's what Merton wrote. What is serious to all human beings is often trivial in the sight of God. What in God might appear to us as play is perhaps what God himself takes most seriously. At any rate, the Lord plays and diverts himself in the gardens of his creation. And if we could let go of our obsession with what we think is the meaning of it all, we might be able to hear his call and follow him in his mysterious cosmic dance. We do not have to go very far to catch echoes of the dancing. So what Merton is saying here is something that makes complete and total sense to a contemplative. It makes total sense to you so that when you hear it, your heart leaps with a sense of joy, not with anxiety. It leaps with a sense of joy because it is your experience. It is your experience of entering into mystery. It is your experience of knowing that you don't have to understand everything. It's your experience of knowing that to trust God is all that is required. To believe that all that you need will always come to you as a gift from God. So it is an invitation to let go of our obsession, as Thomas Merton would say, to try to think what is the meaning of everything, and just to enter into the mystery. Enter into the mystery of God's life and love. As we know, and as we've talked about in this conversation over these last few weeks, entering into the mystery is a lot of work. It means that we have to learn all sorts of new skills, that we have to be willing to put into practice things and that we didn't ever think that were important, and let go of things that we were confident about. It means that we have to let the Spirit of God work on us, to soften us, to make us more pliable, to make us more open to the Spirit of God. In the process of the Spirit of God working with us, kind of like working with dough as you try to make something, a pie crust or something. As you slowly manipulate the dough, you turn it so that you're more palatable, that you're more easily to be baked, if you will, that you actually become what you're supposed to be. That's what God does to us, as God works on us, and he sharpens or takes our sharp edges and makes them less sharp, and he takes our doubts and our questions and makes them less anxious. And he takes our judgments and our perceptions and makes them more filled with a sense of understanding and a spirit of compassion. All those things lead us, I think, to an understanding of the amazing power of God's life and grace. It brings us to an understanding of what it means to be open to the Spirit of God, to be freed from the desire, the obsession, the compulsion to perfect ourselves, to understand that we are beneficiaries of God's mercy and love, and that it's meant to be celebrated. It's meant to be confessed. It's meant to be accepted. It's not meant to be earned. It's not meant to be merited. We had that theological fight hundreds of years ago. It has nothing to do with earning it. It has nothing to do with meriting. It has everything to do with grace. It means trying to live as we can to the best of our ability, to rejoice in who we are as God's people, as people who are blessed by the Spirit of God. Contemplation is the Christian tradition that helps us and invites us to live joyfully every day in the life and in the moment that we're given, and to try to do that in love. Not to be overly concerned with the future. Doesn't mean that you deny the future, but it does mean that you don't become overly concerned with it. Doesn't mean that you become irresponsible. It doesn't mean that you don't plan. Those are all things that are necessary. It doesn't mean that you become obsessed with the past, with what you did or you didn't do, what could have happened, what would have happened, what should have happened. No, what you try to do is you try to live now, in the present moment. Accept what is there. Enjoy it. Be thankful for it. Be grateful for it. It means giving to each and every person that you encounter the benefit of the doubt. Believe that they're not stupid, that they are wise, that they too are children of God, that they too have authentic spiritual experiences that help you understand not only who they are, but help you understand also who you are. There is in this contemplative living a certain joy in knowing that you're doing God's will, of just trying your best and knowing somehow that it's enough, not being overly possessed with the idea that somehow you just don't measure up, or you're just not perfect enough, or there's too many faults that you have, or you haven't really responded with enough enthusiasm. No, you're doing God's will this day by trying to be present to God's moment, God now, and love. And as you try to do that, you become grateful to what God is and who God is. You become grateful for your experience of God. You become grateful for your relationships that have been for you teaching moments and lived experiences of what God is and how God loves us. And in the process of doing all that, you enter into, as Thomas Merton tells us this morning, you enter into God's joyful cosmic dance. You just enjoy it. Enjoy the world in which we live. Enjoy the universe. Enjoy everything that is around you. Take time to smell the flowers, to smell the rain, to pay attention to whatever is happening. Just be joyful in the presence of God. Meister Eckhart, and this is again a difficult statement, but Meister Eckhart tells us what happens if you don't enter into joy. If you don't enter into trying to enter into God's will, if you don't try to live in the present moment. And he talks about it from the experience of what it means to live in hell. And he says this: the only thing that burns in hell is the part of you that you won't let go of in your life. Your memories, your attachments, your thoughts, your desires, what you think is important. Hell burns them all away. But it's not punishing you. It's freeing you. If you're frightened of dying and you're holding on, you'll see devils tearing your life apart. But if you've made peace, then the devils are really angels freeing you from the earth. The power of God's grace is to mold us and to form us, to free us, and to grant to us eternal life, the fullness of God's life and love, celebrated as God intends it, not as we do. I want to thank you for joining in these conversations. This is the last conversation in this particular series. We conclude it today. Not that there's not more questions. There's many more questions. Not that there's more subjects that we could consider. There's many more subjects. But the intention of this conversation was to provide everyone with the basics, with enough to continue to grow and to develop, to try to make some connecting points, to try to see what the opportunities are in life. And hopefully we've been able to scratch the surface. It's been a real privilege for me to be able to be part of this with you. It's an essential part of my own spiritual journey to struggle with these questions, to try to find a way to enter more deeply into the life and to enter more deeply into the cosmic dance that the Lord offers us. So again, thanks so much, and we're grateful for your attendance, and we'll be in touch.